Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Transfer Portal YouTube channel presented by NoContextCFB. We are continuing our conference preview series today. We're talking about America's Conference because quite literally it is America's Conference. Conference USA is the subject for today. My name is Andrew. Alongside me, Brian. How are we doing today, Brian?
We're doing well. We're getting closer and closer to the football season to start. So it's exciting times. Doing previews is always fun because it just means we're that close to the season starting.
Yeah, by the time this video gets out, I believe it'll be close to a calendar month away. We're getting close. It's almost back. We can stop crying ourselves to sleep. We will have Pac-12 after dark to help us sleep. But Pac-12 is not today's subject. Today is the Conference USA. So let's just start off with some base headlines. Probably the biggest one from this last, period without football. Bill Clark steps down from UAB. You can call him the godfather of the program. I feel like that would be a pretty well-deserved title. It's a massive loss for UAB, but he says there's very talented coaches on that staff. Keep UAB up. What's the overall thoughts from when you first heard that, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that it's a little shocking, but, what he did to that program the last 5 years since they shut down, I don't think you could have gotten any better to rebuild that program into back-to-back Conference USA titles and to be one of the best teams in the conference, throughout the period that he was there is incredible. So it's tough. It's definitely tough. It's a huge loss for the conference. It's a huge loss for UAB. But it is health related from what the report said. So obviously that's always more important. And hopefully if everything works out well for him, maybe he can be back on the sidelines, at some point in the future. But it is a big loss for UAB, and it was tough to see for sure.
Yeah, it's a big loss, but he's making the right decision, prioritizing his health. You always got to make sure that's in line. But yeah, it's a massive loss for UAB. Another massive loss in a different area on the field, of course. UTSA lost Sincere McCormick. We'll talk a little bit more about UTSA, but how do we like their chances this year? Will they relive their meat dreams?
Yeah, that's a big loss, I think. Sincere McCormick obviously was one of the best running backs in Conference USA, and honestly, he was one of the best running backs in the country, in my opinion. It'll be a big loss, but I think UTSA, they're well situated. They have Brendan Brady, who was there last year. So they have a few guys there we'll talk about later that I think will be able to fill the void. The biggest thing that is against UTSA this year is that they don't have the schedule they had last year. They have some big, tough games this year, which I think will evidently be their downfall, that they won't be able to replicate the magic they had last year. But it'll be interesting to see for sure.
Yeah, in the first, I believe, 3 or 4 weeks, they play two of the best teams in the state of Texas that aren't named the Roadrunners. They play Houston and the University of Texas. So that's going to be a tough start to a team that we had a lot of fun watching last year and we have high aspirations for this year. Pretty tough start, though. Next up, another team that lost a little bit, but they actually lost significantly more. Western Kentucky. They have lost so much over the last few months. They lost the most prolific passer in the country from last year, the most prolific receiver in the country last year. And also, I should have said most prolific passer of all time in a single season. That's my bad. They lost one of the best offensive minds in the country in Zach Kitley. How are the Hilltoppers going to top the hill this year?
I mean, it's going to be tough. It is going to be tough. Losing that type of firepower, we can talk about Bailey Zappi and Jeff Stearns, but it's going to be, it wasn't just Jeff Stearns either. They also lost Mitchell Tinsley as well. So it's going to be tough, but I don't think it'll be as bad as, it's not at the end of the world for the Hilltoppers whatsoever. but I think it's going to be, they'll definitely not have the season they had last year. But I still think they should be, in decent shape. But it's huge loss. I mean, obviously Bailey Zappi, just everything that he did last year, becoming arguably the greatest passer of all time. The numbers definitely show it, but it's definitely going to be tough. Huge loss for them.
Do we know if they got any more transfers from Houston Baptist? That might be where they need to be going right now. But yeah, they also do lose.
Yeah,
they also lost
definitely for sure.
They also lost one of their best defenders in Beanie Bishop, who was, I believe, their slot corner last year. That's a pretty big loss for the Hilltoppers. But you know who was trying to defend him last year, or who was trying to get past him and did pretty well when he was getting the ball? Tyrese Chambers, one of the best wide receivers I would say the best wide receiver in the conference, one of the most prolific in the country. I believe he averaged the most yards per catch per everybody in the country at somewhere around 23 point something. I don't know the exact number. We recently had him on for an interview. That was Liam and Dylan that had him. Great interview. You should watch it on the Transfer Portal YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe and like. He said he wants to top 2,000 yards. And I was looking at his stats. He had 45 receptions for a little bit over 1,000 and averaging close to 24 yards per catch. If he keeps those numbers up, just give him the ball more. He can definitely get that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's always good whenever you have such big losses, I should say, with any team. Having kind of like that one stability on either side of the ball is always key. So, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that he definitely solidifies or kind of stabilizes that offense a little bit. So we'll definitely have to see how that goes. But I mean, it's always, first of all, we need to know who's going to be passing him the ball. They have Jared Dodge from West Virginia taking over. So, all expectations that he'll be the starter next year or this coming season. So, yeah, if they can gel and this offense can kind of recoup quickly, I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, as someone who had to watch Jared Dagey play football last year, he's not that good. But hopefully it's just one of those things where it's like, new environment, new coaching staff, new players, pretty dang good wide receiver around him. I think he might be able to do something at FIU, probably better than what they did last year, which was pretty gosh darn awful. All right. Do you have any breakout players, Brian, that we should talk about? Because I do have two.
Yeah. So, I think one of them is I mean, it's not necessarily a breakout player, but I think somebody who's going to take more of a role this year is Frank Harris, quarterback for UTSA. I mean, obviously last year, Sincere McCormick was pretty much the headliner at UTSA. But Frank Harris he did a pretty decent job, and now he's back. He's going to take a little bit more control of the offense this year without the Sincere McCormick in the fold. And he's bringing back all three of his top receivers with Josh Cephas and Zachary Franklin. So I think that he can take that, if he can take that next step and kind of become one of the, maybe the best quarterback in Conference USA. I think he has a big chance to break out in that end. And so, yeah, that's what I think he's one of my breakout players. And then my other one is Tyrese Chambers from FIU. They don't have a lot of talent at FIU, but Chambers is definitely one of those guys where he's going to get a bulk of the receptions and a bulk of the passes. So I think that he'll be able to break out and have big numbers for that team. They won't be very good, but at least he'll have big numbers. So I think he has a chance to kind of at least break out a little bit more and kind of lead that offense for as much as they can, because they're going to stink. So, but he'll have decent numbers for sure.
As long as he can get the numbers so he can get that NFL contract, I don't think he's too upset. Obviously, you want to win, but the NFL contract is the goal, and I think he can definitely get one. I'm going to talk about another UTSA player, Traylon Smith, Arkansas transfer. I think he has a chance to not replicate, obviously, the production of Sincere McCormick. That's pretty tough to do. But I think he can definitely take a load in that offense. He's a pretty talented running back for Arkansas last year, averaged 5 yards a carry on 119 touches, had 5 touchdowns, 5'9", so a little bit smaller. I mean, there's some larger backs, some smaller backs. He's pretty close to average right there. But I think that what he was able to do last year at Arkansas, imagine what he's going to be able to do in the CUSA. No diss to the CUSA, because I'm about to talk about them for a little bit of time, but SEC talent's a little bit different, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think he's going to be able to help that backfield a lot after losing McCormick. And then we're going to stick with a UT university, and we're going to go to the other side of the state and talk about the UTEP Miners, who just lost a talented player themselves. They lost Jacob Gallen to the University of Arizona, and they're going to have to replace him. And I think they're going to replace him with Terrence Smith, who last year was in the slot for them. I don't know if he's going to stay in the slot or if he's going to move outside. But for a 5'10 junior, or last year he was a sophomore, I believe, he averaged about 17.3 yards per catch. That's pretty dang good. 33 catches, so a little bit of a smaller sample size. But you also got to realize how much Jacob Gallen was getting the ball last year. I think Smith's is going to get a lot of an uptick in that offense. I think he can be a reason UTEP is close to what they did last year, if not, replicate it as record wise. I don't remember their schedule off the top of my head, but I think that passing offense, it's not going to lose too much of a step without Callie. Obviously, super talented player, but I trust Tyron Smith. So
yeah, no, that's somebody that I had as well. Is Trelon Smith. I did want to put him in my top two. I think that Frank Harris is probably going to have the bigger impact as to break out. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head with Trelon Smith for sure.
All right. Top two in conference games. Do you have any games you're really looking forward to this year, Brian?
So the first one, and I promise you, I'm not trying to be a UTSA homer just because I'm in San Antonio, but I think obviously probably the biggest game in the conference, at least, maybe the last couple of years, is UTSA at UAB. Last year, the game that they had last year was incredible, with UTSA having that amazing comeback and that winning with a last-second touchdown at home at the Alamodome, which was incredible to watch. And so this year it shouldn't be any different. They should be the top two teams in Conference USA. They should be able to duke it out. And the way that they did lose the Conference USA did lose 3 teams this year, so there's no more divisions in Conference USA. So though these 2 teams should be the best 2 teams in the conference. So not only do they play in season November 5th, but they're more than likely, if both teams do what they're supposed to, they should meet again in the Conference USA championship game. So November 5th, UTSA at UAB, it's the biggest game of the year for Conference USA. So that's the biggest game for them. The other one, I also went UTSA, is Western Kentucky at UTSA. It's early in the season, earlier in the season. It's October 8th. So for Western Kentucky, it's kind of like a litmus test for them. It's exactly how good are they after losing all that talent. You get the first big test of the season against UTSA, who again we expect to be one of the great teams, better teams in the Conference USA. And for UTSA, after those, heavy out of conference games early on, like you said, Houston and Texas, in the first month of the season, it kind of gives them back, into their own conference, into one of the better teams, at least should be one of the better teams in conference, and kind of give a litmus test for them and see how they're compared to the rest of the conference. So I think Western Kentucky at UTSA on October 8th, and then UTSA at UAB on November 5th are my 2 games to watch this season.
I should have expected more that you would say UTSA at UAB, because that's the first one I jotted down. That could very well be a rematch of what we'll end up seeing in the conference championship, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we get into our conference standings predictions. But yeah, that's such a revenge game after how the game ended last year for UAB. It's going to be a lot of fun. It better be on some sort of a national network last year, because I want to say it was in some sort of a Texas network or a streaming service that I don't own. So that was pretty stupid. That's going to be a high marquee game for this conference. You better televise it, whatever network has the rights to it. And then I also wrote down Western Kentucky at Charlotte. I think Western Kentucky is going to regress a lot. They lost a lot on offense. They lost a decent amount on defense. Charlotte is one of those teams where it's like, man, you could see them going for a bowl game. Obviously they had the season last year that was pretty impressive at the start and then kind of at the end. I think that this could be a must win for either of these teams. Western Kentucky doesn't have the easiest schedule either. And I think that, say, Charlotte loses this game, that could be the difference between them having a 6-6 season or a 5-7 season, which is pretty big when you get that bowl game. So I think Western Kentucky and Charlotte, obviously not a high marquee matchup, but it could be very important to both of those programs. So, Brian, we're now going to start talking about our conference standings predictions. We'll start from the bottom up, and I want you to give who's going to finish last in the conference.
So I struggled a little bit between these teams, and I think I'm going to go with Rice. I think Rice is going to be the worst team. I just don't think they're very good. They haven't been very good. It's between Rice or FIU, and I went with Rice. With all the talent and all the teams that they have to play this year, and all the talent that is in Conference USA it's very top heavy. I just don't think they're going to be very good. So I went with the Rice as my last team in Conference USA.
In the words of Josh Pate, you don't lose to food. I also have Rice as my bottom team. If you lose to food, you don't deserve to play football. Pretty easy choice for me. 10th place, because there's no longer 14. It's only 11. Weird number for a football conference. I'll take this one first. I have La Tech down here. They have 2 Power 5 teams in the first 3 weeks. That's a pretty tough start for La Tech. And they don't really get too many breaks in their schedule. Like, they'll have a 1 week where they play this bad team. Oh, but now they got to play UAB, or they got to play UTSA, or they got to play UTEP while I'm swatting this mosquito that's around me. It's just annoying for them, as this mosquito is annoying for me, that they don't really get too much of a break. I think La Tech could have a pretty down year.
That's a pretty good one. I think I have them at 9. So spoiler alert, but for number 10, I have FIU. They have a new coach and Mike McIntyre coming into the fold. He has experience turning programs around, but it's not going to happen this year. They do have Tyrese Chambers, like we talked about earlier. But other than that, this is not a talented roster. They do have a new quarterback, a Duke transfer, Gunnar Holmberg. So I just, like I said, that's going to be a new experience for him, and having to anytime you have a new quarterback in, it always takes a little bit, unless you have a very solid program like the top teams do in the country, which FIU is far from it. It takes a little bit for a quarterback to really get into the rhythm of a new team, a new teammates, a new offense. So, I just really don't. Their defense stinks, and it didn't get any better. FIU for number 10 for me.
So we have 9 and 10 switched, because I have La Tech 10 and I have FIU 9. I just don't see too much there, but I think Tyrese Chambers is that freaking good on offense. He can carry them for 2 or 3 games. Obviously, wide receiver, obviously quarterback has to throw in the ball, but I think that he's talented enough where FIU can squeak out 2 or 3 games. 8th spot, I have Charlotte. They have 2 very tough non-conference games in Maryland and South Carolina, but they do return a decent amount of their starters. That's why I don't have them near the bottom, but I don't see Charlotte having that good of a year.
So for my 9th spot, like I said, I have Louisiana Tech for kind of the same reason that you said. I just think they'll be a little bit better than FIU. For number 8, I have Middle Tennessee. They did make a bowl game last year, and they've made a bowl game for the last 5 seasons. So I know it's kind of controversial to have Middle Tennessee this slow, but they have a lot of holes all over the field. They have a new offensive coordinator, Mitch Stewart, who, anytime you have new coaches, especially coordinators, it's a bit of a learning curve. It doesn't matter who, which players you have on the team, and Mitch Stewart is known for having an air raid offense, which is a little bit differently from what they played last year. So it's going to be kind of an adjustment period. So that might take a few games for them to adjust to that, which could cause them losses early on in the season. They have a weak ground game. There's not a lot, in the ground game. Only 1 returning offensive lineman, so that doesn't help the weak ground game that they already have. And they have 1 returning player in the secondary, which obviously, if you can't run the ball, you have learning curve on offense, and you can't defend the pass, especially in Conference USA when you have a lot of teams who run air raid offenses and high-powered offenses, especially at the top of the conference. It's not going to be very good for them. So I know Middle Tennessee, they've been decent the last few years, but there's just too much turnover for me to really have a lot of confidence in them this year.
Yeah, I have Middle Tennessee as my 7th team for a lot of the same reasons. They lost a ton of key defensive contributors, and they play their 3 best opponents in a row. I believe it's UTSA, UAB, and a non-conference. This is just going to be a down year. Every program has a down year. Just because they've had, some better years in the past doesn't mean that they're going to only go on the up and up. Sometimes you got to take the lows with the highs, and I think this is going to be one of the lows. So Middle Tennessee State, 7th in the Conference USA. Number 6, I'm going to go North Texas. They don't have DeAndre Torrey anymore, but they do return almost everything else on offense. So I don't think they're going to be awful, but let's be real, they're not in the top echelon of Conference USA this year.
Yeah, no, definitely. You're absolutely right. For number 7, I have Charlotte. And then, I do think that, so they had back-to-back losing seasons, but they kind of have a little bit more stability this coming year. They have a new defensive coordinator with Greg Brown, so that he can help kind of improve that defense that was awful last year. And they have stability on offense. Chris Reynolds comes back as quarterback. They have probably one of the better receiving cores in the conference, and both starting running backs do come back as well. So I think that'll allow them to win a few games. So I have them at number 7. Number 6, I agree with you. I have North Texas. They last year they won 5 games in a row. They had a good finish to the season to go 6-6, and they beat ranked UTSA. So that's pretty at the last game of the season. So that's a pretty good stepping stone there. They do have stability on offense. Do have a new quarterback, with Grant Gunnell from Arizona. So we'll see how that kind of growing pains come and go. But Oscar Adaway III comes back from an ACL injury to kind of solidify that running back core. Tommy Bush, Jair Shorter, Damian Ward, and Roddick Burns. They have a pretty intact and stable receiving core. So I think that'll definitely help them. So I have North Texas at number 6.
So we both agree on North Texas 6. I don't know if we're going to agree on number 5 because I actually have Western Kentucky. I don't think they're going to be that good this year. Going from Bailey Zappi to Jarrett Dagey, that's not good. They lost so much on the offensive side of the ball that we already talked about. And I think that if they're not careful, they could honestly go lower than this. I'm really worried about Western Kentucky with how much production they lost.
I'll get to them in a little bit. I have them a little bit higher than you do. So for my next pick, I have FAU. They won 5 games last year, so they're almost to the bowl contention. They do have 12 starters returning. N'Kosi Perry coming back at quarterback. They have LaJohntay Wester and Jaquan Burton coming back at receiver. So that kind of, for me, I love consistency and I love foundation. Anytime you have people coming back, it kind of gives you a step up over teams who lost people. So I think that kind of solidifies their offense as well with Nebraska transfer Marvin Scott III. Obviously, like kind of we talked about a little bit earlier, when you leave a Power 5 conference to a Group of 5 conference, the talent level is completely different. So you kind of expect these players coming from Power 5 conferences to probably do a little bit better than they did, or be a little bit better than what they're replacing. So they have Marvin Scott III coming back. And defense is a little suspect. They lost 5 starters on defense, but we'll see what happens. So I have FAU at number 5, and for number 4, I'll go first this time if that's okay with you.
Of course.
I have UTEP. So I think they'll be better this year. They went to a bowl game for the first time last year. Kind of surprised a lot of people. They stunk for a while. And last year they kind of had a decent season, finished 7-6 and went to a bowl game for the first time since 2014. Gavin Hardison at quarterback comes back. Ronald Awat and Deion Hankins comes back as well, and the receiving core, the running back core. So, that's probably, Awat and Hankins is probably the best running back core in Conference USA, in my opinion, at least. And they've kind of been there for a little bit. So they have that, that stability, and they have the ability to kind of keep that momentum going. We did talk about Jack McCowan transferring. So obviously the running back room is going to need some improvement there. The trenches are in good shape. They have meaningful starters on both sides of the ball coming back, so that's going to help solidify the running game. And on the defense side of the ball as well, they'll be able to have a solid defensive line and linebacker core. So their defense should be good with Keenan Stewart and Breon Hayward returning. So I have UTEP at number 4.
Yeah, I have FAU at number 4. I feel like I'm pretty dang high on FAU compared to everybody else. One of the names, I'm surprised you didn't bring up, Johnny Ford. He's back for FAU. The schedule has some places where it favors them. And I think if we're going to have a surprise come end of the year in the Conference USA title game, I think it's one of the top 2 teams, which we both agree on, being UAB and UTSA. I think one of them could fall out and we could easily see FAU jump in there. If that were the surprise, that would not surprise me, as weird as that sounds.
I didn't say Johnny Ford, and the reason why is because he did miss the spring. So there's question marks about Johnny Ford. So hopefully he did miss spring ball. So hopefully he's healthy and he comes back. But no, you're absolutely right. If he comes back healthy and him and Marvin Scott III kind of have a good running back tandem, that should be pretty beneficial for FAU for sure.
Yeah, I like FAU, and I'll talk a tad bit more about them when we get to our hot takes and predictions category. But third, I've got UTEP. I mean, you talked about Awat. He's a great running back. They return a ton of starters, and they avoid UAB in the schedule, which I think is pretty vital if you want to get a win in the Conference USA schedule. Do you want to start with your number 2 team in the conference? Because I feel like I know who it is.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry. I'm still at number 4.
No,
so I had.
Oh, yeah, you have 3. My bad.
Yeah. No, you're good.
I forgot about
no, you're good. So my next team, I have Western Kentucky. So Western Kentucky is my number 3 team. They, like I said, they did go 9-5 last year, and they did make the title game. Obviously, we talked about they're losing pretty much any key offensive player: Bailey Zappi, Jared Stearns, Mitchell Tinsley. So yeah, it's going to be a lot to replicate. It's going to be a lot of big shoes to fill. But like you said, Jared Dagey, I think he's going to be, coming from West Virginia. I think he should have the talent to kind of stabilize that offensive power. So the offense is a question, but if they can get the offense going, I think they'll be good. I don't think they won't lose that much. Maybe they'll lose a couple more games, but I still think they'll be a top 3 team in the conference. For number 2, I do have UTSA at number 2. I don't have them as the number 1 team. I know, shocking, right? And the reason is because they did lose a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, a lot of NFL talent on both sides of the ball. Obviously, Sincere McCormick, we talked about him. He's a huge loss for them. Even though they have Trelon Smith and Brendan Brady coming in. Brendan Brady's obviously been there he'll be a returning. I think he'll be a fifth year senior at this point. So he'll be coming back. So he knows the offense. He knows he has stability there. But Trelon Smith coming from Arkansas, he should definitely, bring up that running back room for sure. They do have the best receiver. They have one of the best receiver core in the league, and they all come back. Like I said, Zachariah Franklin with Josh Cephas and DeCorian Clark, they come back, and they're going to help Frank Harris kind of keep that offensive, momentum that they had last year. The reason why I have him at number 2 is the defense. The defense will need rebuilding for sure. Tariq Woolen, obviously, he got drafted in the NFL. Jalen Haynes and Clarence Hicks, those are 3 key defensive guys that are all gone to the NFL. So those are going to be hard to replicate, to replace. And they do have a tough out-of-conference schedule. They play Houston, they play at Texas, they play at Army, and they do play UAB on the road. So they were lucky enough to have them at home last year. And I'm not even saying this as a homer. This is probably known. You can ask any player who's played at the Alamo Dome in San Antonio. It's one of the hardest and loudest places to play. And that's where they played UAB last year, and they won on a last-second touchdown. So it'll be a lot tougher to play them, in Birmingham instead of playing them at the Alamo Dome. So that's why I have UTSA as number 2.
Well, I'm shocked because I thought for sure you were going to have UTSA at number 1, which there's many reasons to put them at number 1. I have them at number 2 as well. I have written down in my notes exactly. Offense should be phenomenal, but can the defense keep up? Because they did lose some NFL talent. Talked about Tariq Woolen. He's now in Seattle. But that matched with the out of conference schedule where they play 3 tough teams, 2 especially being Houston and Texas. We don't know how Army's going to do this year because I don't keep up with Army football until Army Navy that much, unless they make a big upset like they did last year. But yeah, UTSA, they have a lot of returning production on offense outside of obviously losing Sincere McCormick. I think their offense will be very good. It's just the defense, can it get back to that level? They still have a very talented safety in Rashad Wisdom, but can they keep it close to that level? Because they're not going to be able to replicate that. I don't think anybody believes that. It's just, can they keep it close? Because that's going to be the reason that they make the title game, which they probably will, but it's a matter of, can they win it against both of our number 1 teams, the UAB Blazers?
That's right. Yeah, UAB. I think they kind of get back to the top net this coming year. Obviously, Bill Clark stepping down is a huge loss for them. But I think that might actually, give them that kind of motivation to win. Brian Vincent, and it's not like they're bringing in some random a new outside head coach. Brian Vincent is their interim head coach. He hasn't lost the interim tag, but at least for this season, he is their interim coach. So he was their offensive coordinator. So at least there's still kind of that. Like I said, again, it's a topic for me, is stability. They bring that stability with Brian Vincent. And they barely lost to UTSA last year at home at UTSA. Like I mentioned, the defense is one of the best in the conference for me. Kale Sanders, Noah Wilder, 2 really, really good running backs who could potentially be NFL caliber. They could potentially be drafted in the NFL. They have 2 great DBs with Starling Thomas and Keandre Swoops. So that's really big for them to have that defense to kind of combat these powered offenses in the conference. Dwayne McBride and Jermaine Brown Jr., they're probably one of the best running back core in the league. In the conference, they rushed for over 2,000 yards combined last year, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to do that again. So yeah, I think that UAB is going to be very, very good. I don't know that either UTSA or UAB will replicate the success they had last year per se, but I think in terms of the conference, I still think they're the best team. They're going to be the best team in the conference, but it's very close between UAB and UTSA for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be a pretty good title game, I'd say. You pretty much touched on everything UAB, so I appreciate you for not giving me much to talk about. Kidding, of course. Dwayne McBride is a freaking stud. I already know a decent amount of NFL draft people that are falling in love with him, so that's going to be fun to watch his season. And one of the biggest things with UAB is they only have 1 Power 5 opponent, and that's LSU. An LSU opponent that will not be that good this year. Obviously, it's LSU. We can never underestimate the Tigers and Brian Kelly, of course, but we're not talking about the 2019 Tigers with Joe Burrow, spelled with the Reaux. We're talking about Jaden Daniels, or I don't know who else is going to start. But right now it kind of seems like Jaden Daniels, but this is not a SEC podcast. UAB, I think that they're going to win the most games. They're going to have the best conference record. They're going to have the best record in general, which leaves us with a UAB UTSA CUSA title game. Do either of us have UTSA?
I mean, I want to. It's all going to depend where it's played. If I pick if I think the regular season matchup, they'll host a title game, and I think that UAB beats them again. So yeah, I do have UAB winning the conference, but it'll definitely be close, and I would not be surprised if UTSA ends up winning both of those games or they split 1-1. So I do think that it'll be very, very close.
Yeah, I'm also going to take UAB, but you can never sleep on meat. It's one of the best things that came out of college football last year. So moving on, we've got one more little segment. I have 3 hot takes / predictions. I don't know how hot they are or if I should just call them predictions. But Brian, do you have any, staunch predictions that you truly believe are going to happen this year that some people may not see coming?
So my biggest one that might be the most controversial. I'm not gonna go too hot and say that UTSA is going to beat Texas, but I do think that UTSA will lose by less than 1 score, which is pretty damn good considering how the expectations Texas has this coming season. So I guess I don't want to have a hot take for a team that loses, but I think it's pretty impactful if UTSA can go into Austin and but play a really close game with Texas and lose, pretty close late. I think I think a lot of people will be surprised by that. And I think a lot of people will be, give UTSA that much credit. So I think that's one of my hot takes. My second hot take is, I think I kind of talked about it. I don't think Middle Tennessee will be that good. I know it's not as hot a take as people might think, at least people who pay attention to football and to Conference USA. But I know just because they made a bowl game, pretty much consistently the last 4 or 5 years. And I don't think they're going to be that good this year. So I guess that would be my second hot take. But yeah, it's not as controversial or sexy as you might think, but I do think it's still kind of hot for sure.
Well, I would say that UTSA losing by less than 1 score to Texas is a little controversial.
Yeah.
So because I think Texas is going to be really good. I think UTSA is going to be really good. It's going to be a fun game. If one of the funniest things that could happen on social media coming from the CUSA season is if Meat Nation takes down the Longhorns at Texas, social media will be ablaze. There will be a million people tweeting horns down. There will be a million people tweeting the Sam Ellinger video saying, we're back, because guess what? You're not back. And that would be so funny.
It would be even funnier if if Texas beats Alabama and then loses to UTSA. That'll be, oh my God, that would be hilarious.
Now, see, the biggest loser of that would be Alabama.
Yeah.
Because not only did you lose to Texas, you lost to a team that lost to UTSA. Now, UTSA is great. Alabama, different tier. So I feel like that'd be kind of disheartening for them in their quest to go 15-0. But yeah, I think that's a pretty hot take, but honestly, not the hottest. I'm going to go with a record breaker for my first one. Trevor Inslee. That name sound familiar? He has the current NCAA record for most receiving yards in a season at 2,060. That record is no longer belonging to him after this year. Tyrese Chambers is going to break that when he not only eclipses more than double the receptions last year at 45, he will have well over 90. He will break 2,060 receiving yards. He is that good. He averages so much per catch. That's a massive thing in his favor. If anybody's going to break it this year, quite easily, it's Tyrese Chambers for me. So that's the first one. I don't think that's super hot if you know how good Tyrese Chambers is, but it is still, it's a record breaker. You got to call it a little bit of a hot take. Yeah. Next one, I'm going to say we kind of both believe this with how our conference predictions went. UAB is not going to miss a step with Bill Clark on. Obviously, it's a massive loss, but the place he's put this program in over the last 5 years is freaking phenomenal. Any coach can go in there from his current staff and they'll find success, whether it's as much as he did when he was coach. That's to be seen. But I think UAB is going to be in a great spot for the next few years. I don't think Bill Clark leaving means they go from 11-1 to 4-8. I don't think that's the case by any means. I think they're still going to be a very good football program. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. FAU, I think they have set themselves up to become not only a player in this conference, but let's talk about a few years down the line when they get to the American. Can we see them being players in the American? I think I can. Yeah,
no, I agree with you. And not just them too. I mean, pretty much, UTSA too. I think both of those programs are in great shape, moving forward. They definitely have a bright future ahead of them. Especially if they continue this kind of upward swing that they're on. The one thing that I hate that happens to group of 5 teams is that as soon as they get any sort of success, as soon as they get any sort of stability, they get gouged, they get poached for their coaches, Jeff Traylor, we saw it's FAU specifically what happened with Lane Kiffin when he was there. So that's the only thing that will kind of slow things down for these teams. But no, I agree with you 100%. FAU, UTSA, maybe even North Texas too. They have the trajectory to be really good moving forward, especially when they move to the American and they start bringing a little bit more money. And I do think they'll be a lot better.
You can never doubt the states of Texas or Florida when it comes to college football, unless you're USF and the year's not 2007. That being said, I think that's a pretty good place to end it. For everyone listening on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast, make sure to follow. subscribe, share the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. That'd be pretty nice. Do everything that everybody else tells you to do. Share the YouTube video. Follow us on TPortalCFB on Twitter. Doing a lot of great college football content going into the year, where we will start producing about 10 times more. So you might as well join now to get as much content as possible. My name's Andrew. Brian, anything else to say?
We're almost there, baby. You can kind of start smelling the barbecues cooking. We're almost there. Just a few short weeks away. We're almost in August. Once August hits and training camp starts, and I can't wait. So I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. We're gonna have college football on our TV screens before we know it. So strap in. A lot of content coming, and it's about to get real busy for sure.
Brats are on the grill, beers are getting shotguns, crowds are getting loud. College football is almost back. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Man.
Have a great day.